Hello and welcome back to the Sex Talk. My name is Mo, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about the side effects of trauma.
The Sex Talk.
The Sex Talk.
Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, click the notification bell so that you can get notified when a new video comes out. So trauma, often diagnosed as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a disorder that is in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual of Mental Illness and Disorders, a book that I don't love to follow. I really don't appreciate working within the medical model. And that is, I have a separate video on my channel about working in the medical model. So if you're billing insurance, for example, you have to sort of get diagnosed and give diagnoses for a lot of problems that I feel are culturally biased, and we often tend to diagnose and make things into a problem when they don't actually need to be seen as a problem. And that is part of being a sex-positive therapist. As sex-positive therapists, we celebrate sexuality in all its dimensions and the breadth of sexuality versus, making something a problem or turning something into pathology. Pathologizing is the word that we use in psychotherapy and I believe that the field tends to over-pathologize things. People love that DSM book. Well, sort of, now that I've made my spiel on that, and you can watch my video on privatizing mental health, the importance of paying for mental health out of pocket and getting away from that medical model, I think is important. However, there's that piece that when things are medicalized, unfortunately, in our society, we tend to take it more seriously, and that's the downside. The other thing is we want to be able to pay for this type of thing through insurance, and surely I want you to be able to afford mental health therapy. And so in my group practice, we do accept insurance as part of being accessible, offering accessible healthcare to a variety of people. So with that spiel said, with all of that said, let's talk about trauma today. I want to talk a little bit about the side effects of trauma. So you may be familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder. You probably hear a lot of talk about triggers, getting activated. Well, what happens in your day-to-day life that are actual results of the trauma that you've experienced is what I'm going to get into right now. So one of the main things that is a common sort of fallacy around, for example, let's talk about sexual trauma. People assume that if you've experienced some sort of sexual trauma, that it's going to affect you in your sex life as an adult. If you've been raped, then somehow you're going to now have these, trauma around sex and intercourse and things like that. And while that may be true, it's also important to recognize that trauma, it doesn't matter what kind of trauma, it's going to affect your life profoundly in every area. So it doesn't matter if it's sexual trauma, physical trauma, vicarious trauma, which is something you've watched on television, or vicarious trauma, a lot of therapists experience it by sitting with their clients and listening to their traumatic stories. Vicarious trauma is just somebody else's trauma that you observe that also affects you. It can be emotional trauma from emotional abuse, it can be trauma from rejection. It can be trauma from a bad relationship where you were fighting a lot and there was a lot of disagreeing. Trauma from being gaslit. Trauma doesn't always have to be something super dramatic or terrorist oriented like 9/11 or the Vietnam War, which is how the term originally came about, was soldiers were coming back from the Vietnam War with post-traumatic stress disorder. That's been sort of recognized for a long time that PTSD can affect a variety of people, especially if, especially people of color, Black Americans have experienced extreme trauma. Slave trauma is a big thing. All of these types of things affect you in really significant ways. And so I want to talk about what that looks like after the fact. One of the things that you might notice if you've experienced it is hypervigilance or paranoia. This is the most common one. It basically renders you with the inability to trust virtually anyone. So this is what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter if you were raped or if you were verbally abused by your parent or a partner, or had a lot of fights with somebody, and whatever it was, you sort of left with this open wound of rawness that over time becomes even more raw unless you're allowed to heal. But what happens in our society is that, particularly with things like racial trauma, and particularly with all kinds of trauma, once you've experienced it, salt continues to get poured into that wound. So it really becomes difficult for that trauma to heal. And so over time, we actually continue to get re-traumatized. And well, this video isn't about re-traumatization, although I think that's a very important part of it, and I could probably do an entire video on it. We do get re-traumatized. A lot of times it's because of the way we respond. Because we don't trust people, because you're having a difficult time trusting anybody, really, that trauma seems to sort of like compound itself. It becomes exponential. So paranoia, hypervigilance, this type of like you're always kind of looking over your shoulder, you're distrusting things people say, you're always wondering, what did they really mean? These are all side effects or AKA symptoms of trauma. This can lead to long-lasting feelings of course, fear. Helplessness, learned helplessness is such an important one, and we don't talk about it enough. The funny thing about learned helplessness is it's like something that we're taught in Psychology 101 way back when I was like a baby, maybe in like my senior year of high school, or I don't even remember when I took Psych 101, maybe it was my freshman year in college. But in Psych 101, they teach you about learned helplessness, and it is something that really is profound, and we need to talk about it more, because it's this feeling of powerlessness. It's this feeling that no matter what I do, I'm never ever gonna be able to get out of it. And this kind of compounds the experience of trauma and re-traumatization. We get re-traumatized over and over. This helplessness leads us to, this is the one that I wanted to talk about the most today, is we feel like we're the victim. We're constantly stuck in this victimhood. And the thing about victimhood is, yes, it's this line. And yes, you were deeply victimized, you were traumatized, you were treated in ways that have deeply harmed you and have, serious psychological ramifications. The downside of that is being the victim in every situation, which is what I see too much. And that's the part that ends up holding trauma victims back. We hear that term survivor a lot, so we're trying to tip the scales from victim to survivor. And a survivor essentially recognizes the places where they were victimized, but also takes charge of their healing. And I'm going to preface this by saying it sucks that you even have to be responsible for this aspect of your life, your healing. But if you're not, you're going to get stuck in that victim. What they took from you, you're going to allow them to continue taking. So I think the gist of this talk is to recognize how we need to get out of being the victim. So one thing that victims do is blame. Blame, 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 blame. And it can become this sort of vicious cycle where you're finding your need to find faults in everything, in everyone, is going to perpetuate this. You're going to be pointing the finger of blame for the rest of your life. And that takes the onus away from you, right? It gives that onus to someone else, everybody else. And it takes away your healing. It actually sabotages your own healing. So what is important to start doing, if you find that you blame a lot of people, recognizing one, that this probably means that you've experienced some trauma. I think that a lot of people who do extensive amount of blaming may not even recognize that they've probably experienced some trauma, and that trauma needs to be healed. So if you are someone that blames a lot, you probably have a trauma that needs to be healed. And so one of the steps to doing that is recognizing that the longer you perpetuate this pattern of needing to find faults in people, the longer you're going to get stuck and always needing to point the blame. And in order to shift that cycle, you need to stop judging people. But what that really, really means is you need to stop judging yourself. Because at the day, this is a displaced anger that you've developed over time because of your trauma. Trauma leads to being paranoid, being hypervigilant, fear, anger. Those are the key tenets. If you find that you've got just a shit ton of anger in your body that you're just constantly feeling enraged about, there's a really strong indicator that you have experienced some amount of trauma. And so getting to the root cause of what is actually causing your anger can be very healing. But also, if you're not doing the heavy duty work with a therapist right now, because honestly doing trauma work is heavy, it's really important for you to just start this practice of non-judgment. And I have a friend who's a life coach, and he does these 30 days of practicing non-judgment. And I know that can be really hard. So just try it for an hour. Try noticing, are you judging? What are you judging? Are you pointing the finger? Do you want to blame something for something that's going on in your body, in your life, that you're feeling right now? If so, catch yourself and try to redirect that thought. In fact, don't even try to redirect it. For now, just notice that you're judging, that you're trying to and wanting to put the blame somewhere. But what you really want to do is hold somebody accountable for that trauma that you experienced, that you were never able to hold that accountable for. That's the root cause of it. And getting to the bottom of that can be super healing. I recommend this in all of my videos, journaling, talking to somebody, getting clear about what that trauma was, and getting it out of your body, getting it out of your system. Somatic therapy can be a really great way to do that as well. So I just wanted to, it's getting to be a long video, and I don't want it to be super long, but I want you to recognize that blaming, putting the blame on somebody, pointing the finger, playing that victim, being continuously helpless is a side effect of trauma, and it keeps you stuck. So your goal is to try to move out of that blame place, try to move out of pointing the finger. It doesn't mean you're going to point the finger back at you. It just means we got to try to come from a place where we don't judge what we do or what others do. And basically acknowledging how we feel is the key to that. Acknowledgement is key. We don't act on it, we don't respond, but we do acknowledge. We don't brush it under the rug. We definitely acknowledge, hey, this is happening right now. And we try to get to the root cause of that. And you know what your trauma is better than anyone else does. And it's important to hold that trauma accountable, not everybody else. So that was it for today. And I will see you soon. Take care. Bye.
The Sex Talk.
The Sex Talk.